Welcome back to MacStories Unwind. Today's show is brought to you by Collide. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We have some fun picks today. Before we get
do.
there, though, we haven't done Unplugged in a while, and I want to reach back in time to many years ago now, and we talked about the cicadas. Do you remember the cicadas?
I do. They come every 7 years or something.
Something like that. I mean, I think it's actually longer than that, but they're giant bugs. They're like locusts, basically. They come out of the ground.
Why do we need to talk about this again?
Because
is it necessary?
This is the year, Tichi.
Oh no, in North Carolina.
Coming back. And not only are they coming back, but it's what they call a double brood. These things.
Oh, they're coming back with a vengeance.
They're coming back with a vengeance. There are two different groups of them that are coming out at the same time since sometime. Now I'm going to get this wrong because I looked at this article like a month or two ago and meant to put it in our show notes, but they're coming out at the same time, these two broods, for the first time since like sometime in the 1800s. So modern America has never seen this many bugs come out of the ground at one time. And it's due to start about 1 month from now.
Well, it's been nice knowing you.
I know. Well, it's one reason we moved there. I remember the last time this happened when we lived in Illinois. Jennifer and I said to each other, you know what? That's our deadline. We're moving by the time those things come out of the ground again.
So it won't happen in North Carolina?
I don't think so. Not to the degree. Like these are a bug that's kind of like everywhere in a lot of parts of the U.S., just in smaller quantities most years. And they do have them here. I see them, but one or two of them here or there is not a big deal. It's when there are thousands, tens of thousands of them just like coating walls of buildings and stuff where it's really gross and feels like an invasion. And that will happen throughout the Midwest, spreading somewhat east, but not as far as here, I don't believe.
Cool. Can we please talk about something else? This is terrible.
We can talk about something else. But I feel like I'm reminiscing about the old days of living in Illinois, and I just wanted I wanted to bring up the bugs. But you've got better things to talk about than bugs. Why don't you tease a little something you've been working on?
I can talk about shortcuts, which has different kinds of bugs, but
lots of them.
lots of them. No, but I wanted to mention something that I teased on MacStories earlier this week, and that is my MultiButton 1.1 update. So if you recall, MultiButton is a shortcut that I shared in September to be able to run two shortcuts instead of one when you press the action button on your iPhone 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max. And it does that by toggling between two shortcuts if you press the action button twice within a few seconds. So if you press the action button, the first time it runs your primary shortcut, and if you press the action button again within, by default, 7 seconds, it runs a secondary shortcut. Now, this has been working great for me. I've been using MultiButton myself for the past really 6 months at this point. Mm-hmm. But I've been working on something else. And now this something else is part of MultiButton version 1.1, but the additional feature will be available exclusively for Club MacStories members of all tiers. So even all the people that receive MacStories Weekly will also get access to this feature. So this feature is called CAPS. As in, you put on a cap. It stands for Contextual Apps Plugin System.
Oh,
so
nice.
This fancy acronym is an automation. It's basically an automation layer for shortcuts that I built to change the behavior of the action button depending on which app you're currently using. So my idea was, so assigning two shortcuts to the action button instead of one is nice. But what if the action button could truly become a contextual button that changed what it does based on the app that I'm in? So like, what if the action button, you press it and you're using OmniFocus or Things, and it has task management related shortcuts. But then if you press it inside Timery, it has timer functions. And if you press it inside Ivory, it has Mastodon functions. And if you press it on the home screen, it goes back to default. But then you press it inside, Good Links, and it has read later functionalities.
Oh.
And this is made possible this is made possible by Caps, which is a series of 3 shortcuts that I will share in MacStories Weekly. These allow you to put together, with a very easy setup process and a consistent file format that is open and compatible with all kinds of shortcuts, these triggers for when a specific app is open and a specific app is closed. And if the app is open on your iPhone and if it's in the foreground, it will override the default behavior of MultiButton. And when you close the app, it'll go back to default again. If you just download version 1.1 of MultiButton from MacStories, you won't notice anything different because Caps will be available in MacStories Weekly. Once it is available in MacStories Weekly this Saturday, I will have instructions on how to enable the Caps integration and how you can get started with setting up these automations for yourself. And I can tell you, John, I've been using this setup, like this contextual setup, for the past, it's been ready for 3 months, really. I was busy with other things. I've been relying on this myself for the past 3 months. I have my Caps enabled automations for things, for good links, for Safari. It is being transformative for my use of the action button. And it totally is something that I really hope that Apple, quote unquote, steals from me in a native way going forward. Once you have a contextual action button that changes based on the app that you're using it with, you don't want to go back to the previous system. So all the shortcuts and the instructions and the walkthrough will be released in MacStories Weekly this Saturday for all club members.
Very nice. I can't wait to use that. I know that you've been playing around with it, and I knew it had to go on the shelf for a little while you were building the Mac Pad and doing other things.
Yes.
But it's great that it's coming out now.
Yep.
This episode of MacStories Unwind is brought to you by Collide. When you go through airport security, there's one line where the TSA agent checks your ID and another one where a machine scans your bag. The same thing happens in enterprise security, but instead of passengers and luggage, it's end users and their devices. These days, most companies are pretty good at the first part of the equation, where they check user identity. But user devices can roll right through authentication without getting inspected at all. In fact, 47% of companies allow unmanaged, untrusted devices to access their data. That means that an employee can log in from a laptop that has its firewall turned off and hasn't been updated in 6 months, or worse, that laptop might belong to a bad actor using employee credentials. Collide finally solves the device trust problem. Collide ensures that no device can log into your Okta-protected apps unless it passes your security checks. Plus, you can use Collide on devices without MDM, like your Linux fleet, contractor devices, and every BYOD phone and laptop in your company. Visit collide.com/MacStoriesUnwind today to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/MacStoriesUnwind. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show. All right, why don't we get on with the picks? And I'll go first with a video game I've been playing on the Switch called Balatro.
It's so good.
It is so good. Now, this comes highly recommended by Brendan Bigley. I heard about it first on Into the Aether. This game is a roguelike that is available on a bunch of different platforms. I'm playing on the Switch, but you can get it on Steam and some other places, I think. And it's a card game. And I was very hesitant at first to download this game, only because I'm not a big card game person, especially when it comes to video games. And this one's a little different, though, because really the card game part of it, which is based on poker, is really an artifice to more of a traditional roguelike, I guess is what I would call it. And what's neat about it is that because most people have at least some passing knowledge of poker, you don't have, and you really don't need like a deep knowledge of poker to play this game, because I certainly don't have that. And there are buttons you can press to kind of see cheat sheets of the different hands that you're looking for, which is good if you're not familiar with poker. And it doesn't have a lot of the complexity of the strategy of poker itself. It has a whole different kind of strategy, because what what you do is you basically have goals. You get a hand dealt to you, and you have to beat a blind. And the blind is a goal to get to a certain number of points. And the points are determined depending on both the card's value, but also a bunch of additional cards and other features that are built into this game that take it way beyond a card game, because there's a whole system of jokers that each one has a unique quality to it that can add to your points in different ways. There are planet cards, there are tarot cards, there are these vouchers that you can purchase. Because what happens is when you get to the end of a level, when you get to the end of one of these blinds and you've beaten it, you reach the point goal, you cash out and you get a certain amount of cash that you can spend of online currency to purchase these various jokers and other attributes that'll help you in further rounds down the road. And so you have to kind of carefully evaluate how you're spending your money that you've won and what kind of deck you're building with these, jokers and planet cards and everything else. And if you do a good job with that, it makes it easier for you to get points faster and beat the future blinds. And it just continues like that until at some point you're dealt an unlucky hand and you're unable to go any further and you have to start all over again. I mean, this game, it's both addictive. So I've found myself playing it for long stretches, but it also is the kind of game that you can dip in and out of if you can control yourself for short periods of time. So I find this to be like I don't have a lot of time, but before I go to bed or something, but I'll play with this for, half an hour, and it's perfect for that. And I think it would be good on just about any platform, but I've enjoyed it on the Switch.
Yeah, a couple of things that I wanted to say because I've also been obsessing over this game.
Okay.
First of all, you don't need to know poker. I have never played poker in my life. So really, my biggest obstacle with Balatro was just learning the 6 different terms, like the terminology for like what is a straight, what is a flush, what is a full house. Like that was my only obstacle for learning how to play Balatro. But it's easy enough because on the Switch you can just press the minus button at any point and you have a cheat sheet of what all the different hands mean. And really think of it as a card game. So the roguelike card game is not a new category. I mean, obviously, thinking of Slay the Spire and there are elements of Marvel Snap here and there. Like it's not a new genre, but how Balatro somehow manages to sit at the intersection of a card game, a roguelike, because each run is randomized, but also these RPG elements. The reason why Balatro, I think, appeals to me is that the whole system of Joker cards, which are also collectible, and there's a collection that you can go into in the main menu to see all the jokers that you've accumulated. Yep. The jokers are basically buffs, like all these power-ups that you can mix and match. Like in an RPG, you can get these temporary buffs for your current run. And so, for example, you may get a joker that says, when you play a diamond card, your chips are doubled. Or you can get jokers that act on the multipliers. The whole point system is predicated upon the chips, so the value of a card, and the multiplier that goes into effect when it comes to counting your hand. So, for example, last night I had this really good run where I had these jokers that you can stack up to 5 jokers, I think, and then you can have up to 3 tarot cards in the upper right corner of the UI. And I had this really good run where I had these jokers, one that randomly applied a multiplier from 2x up to 15x, and then another joker that applied like a fixed 1.5x multipliers. And all these multipliers, they stack on top of each other, and so when you reach the higher levels, you end up with these wild points where you could score really 20,000 on a single hand, and it makes you feel really good. But what Balatro does so well is making you feel good for like 2 minutes and then immediately hitting you with either a bad hand or a big blind that requires you to score like 75,000 points, and all your face cards are debuffed, and like that push and pull of like, I feel good about my run and I feel good about my deck, and the game not punishing you but sort of putting you back in your place and being like, well, we make the rules here, buddy. Like that is what keeps you playing. This is right now, I think it's one of the best games of 2024.
It's really good. And I think that the balance seems to be really well done. I mean, which I think is remarkable given how many different kinds of card combinations there are and special cards, that this is not like either too hard or too easy. I mean, there are hands where you're like, oh, well, that was super easy because you just happen to get dealt something really, really easy. But then the next one, no matter what you do, whether you discard cards or however you play it, you just can't beat it, and you got to start all over again. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, really, really good game. My pick is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Good.
Obviously, I have been playing this game on my PS5, so there are gonna be no spoilers here. So this is safe territory if you're also on the verge of playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I, at the moment, I've put in about 11 to 12 hours into the game, and I have 100%ed the first area of the game, the grasslands. And that is what I want to talk about today here, which is this game is a very different game from what I was expecting. I am still not sure completely how I feel about it, but I think I'm leaning toward a positive opinion so far. So this is and don't take this the wrong way, but this is the Ubisoft take on a Final Fantasy VII remake. In the sense that you have, so the game picks up right where Final Fantasy VII remake wrapped up, and the game is comprised of all these open areas. So there is no single like open world, at least so far right now where I'm at. So you start in this grasslands area. And unlike the previous Final Fantasy VII remake, which was set in the city of Midgar, and it was very much self-contained, there was the main storyline and there were some side quests. Here, it's the world map is chock full of stuff to check out, sort of like in a Ubisoft game. So they have borrowed elements from Assassin's Creed, from Zelda. For example, there's a bunch of towers that you need to activate, just like in a Zelda game. Not to uncover areas of the map, but to fill the world intel. That's how it's called. To fill the world intel sort of progress bar for like how many things you have discovered in the area. And there's different categories of world intel. You can discover these towers that unlock more side quests and missions. You can by the way, all of these things are assigned to you by Chadley, which is a new character that they introduced in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It had a relatively minor role in Remake. It has a much bigger role here in Rebirth. And Chadley assigns you like monster research, or you got to find these life springs scattered throughout the map. And so the map is full of icons, essentially. And typically, like I know, for example, that the folks on the Besties, another excellent video game podcast, they didn't like the repetitiveness of doing this over and over, like all this, because it arguably is filler content, right? Because you can just ignore these things and go, just complete the main story and largely ignore all the side stuff. But the side stuff, I think the reason why Square Enix manages this so well and why the side stuff doesn't bore me at all is that, first of all, it is instrumental to letting you unlock more materials. There is, of course, crafting in this game, John, like lots of other modern open world games. So you unlock materials, you level up your characters, and it is beneficial to complete the side stuff. But really, the one aspect that saves Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, at least so far for me, from the common pitfall of the Ubisoft open world game, is the fact that the combat is so fun. Like, the combat saves Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And I say the combat because I haven't seen enough of the story. We'll talk about this in the future. Obviously, I'm also playing this for the story, but the combat is so fun. Like the additions in this one, there are new synergy abilities. So these are basically combos that you perform with another party member, and these combos may have additional benefits, like, for example, raising your MP bar, that's your magic points, or increasing your limit break, so having more powerful limit moves. Like, the combat, because it is so fun, and because as you level up, monsters that roam the world become so easy to deal with, you are enticed, at least me personally. I know that Jason Schreier from Bloomberg also had the same opinion on the Triple Click podcast. Mm-hmm. I am compelled to complete all these side objectives and quests on the main map because I really love hanging out with these characters, the combat, and the little I've seen of the story so far. The fact that completing these side objectives also has an effect on your relationships with different party members. That is another aspect that I like. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, unlike Remake, makes, I think, for a much better sort of like hangout game, in the sense that you can just, hang out with Tifa and Aerith and Barrett, and just, you can talk to them and you can check on your relationship with each party member. I think 7 Remake was a much more sort of straight to the point game. Here's the story, here's Midgar, you don't really have a lot of freedom, there's your main storyline and a sprinkle of side quests here and there. Here, it's the same story and the same characters, but presented with a completely different framework, and I gotta tell you, obviously the game looks gorgeous on the PS5. It sounds amazing. Like the orchestrated rearrangements of the original Final Fantasy VII tracks sound incredible. The combat is so fun, and so I'm willing to forgive, like, some of this side stuff is a little bit uninspired, and I recognize that. But because the world is so strong and the cast of characters is so fun and pleasant to play with, I 100%ed the first area after 11 hours, and I am now moving on.
That's great. What would you recommend this game to someone like me who's never played a Final Fantasy VII game?
Nope. No, you got to start with Remake. Yeah. Don't listen to those articles and videos that have seen, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth can be your first Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
No. You can start with 7 Remake even without knowing the original, and it makes for a really good story. Of course, it does help to know some context from the original game, but do not start with Rebirth. Start with Remake.
Good to know. All right, Federico. Well, that's a couple of good video game recommendations for today. That'll keep people busy for quite a while. I've been watching a lot of TV recently too. So I've picked up like 2 or 3 different shows. I haven't been ready to share any of them yet because I'm not deep enough into each one of these seasons, but I'll have some soon enough. So stay tuned for that. And stay tuned for Federico's MultiButton shortcut that's coming in MacStories Weekly on Saturday. Thanks again to our sponsor for this episode. That's Collide. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico and I are on Mastodon. Just go to Viticci.MacStories.net and JohnVorhees.MacStories.net to follow us there. And we're on Instagram and Threads. Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.